Phoenix is already rationing water. The federal government has declared a Tier 2 shortage on the lower Colorado. Georgia put its entire state on drought response level 1 last month, and the May 15th Bureau of Reclamation report projected Lake Powell to fall below the elevation at which Glen Canyon Dam can produce reliable power by December of this year. 5 water system crises are now active in 5 different parts of the country at the same time. This video walks through what they are, why they are converging now, what the next 7 months will determine, and what happens to the 40 million Americans that will be impacted by this. Let's get into it. The number is 3,490 feet. That is the elevation above sea level of the surface of Lake Powell at the point where Glen Canyon Dam can no longer reliably generate electricity. Engineers call it minimum power pool. Below that line, the dam's 8 turbines lose the head pressure they need to spin reliably, and the dam stops being a stable source of power for the roughly 5 million customers across 7 states who depend on it. Lake Powell, on May 24, 2026, sat at 3,527 feet. 37 feet above the line, and the federal report we are about to walk through now projects the lake to cross that line by Christmas. Not as a worst case, not as a stress test, as the most probable outcome on the Bureau of Reclamation's own monthly study published just over a week ago. This is the first of 5 independent water system deadlines that have now converged on the same calendar year. Each was scheduled separately by different agencies over different decades. The drought is at its 131-year peak. The hydropower threshold is projected to be crossed by December. The legal framework that has governed the river expires on the same December. The cities are already rationing right now, and the aquifer underneath 6 states is grinding toward an unusable state on a multi-decade clock that runs regardless of what the surface water does. The first thing you need to understand about why this is happening in 2026, specifically, is that the deadlines were not designed to land together. They were designed independently, decades apart, by people who did not coordinate. The Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922. Glen Canyon Dam was finished in 1966. The 2007 interim guidelines were signed in 2007 for a 19-year horizon. The Ogallala depletion has been measured since the 1950s. The data center industry started building hyperscale facilities in the 20-teens. None of these clocks were synchronized. They have simply all reached 0 in the same calendar year. The deadlines have stacked. And the rescue mechanism, the El Niño now forming in the Pacific, arrives in the most likely scenario after December has already passed. On May 15, 2026, the United States Bureau of Reclamation released its monthly most probable 24-month study. The study is the document the federal government uses to plan the next 2 years of operations for the Colorado River system. It is published on a fixed monthly schedule with all assumptions and inflow scenarios listed in the open. The trend in the monthly numbers, every month for the last 5 years, has been downward. The May 15th study projects Lake Powell to end the 2026 water year, September 30th, at 3,510.85 feet of elevation. That is about 4.77 million acre-feet of water in storage, or 20% of capacity. Under the most probable scenario, the same study projects Powell to end the calendar year, December 31st, at 3,471 feet. That is 19 feet below minimum power pool. The base case, in the federal government's own paperwork, is that Glen Canyon Dam loses reliable hydropower generation by the end of this year. The reason is what did not fall from the sky last winter. By May 4th, the Colorado Basin's snowpack stood at approximately 2.5 inches of snow water equivalent, 23% of the 30-year median of 10.7 inches, the lowest reading at that point in the calendar in the modern instrumented record. On May 5th, the Colorado Basin River Forecast Center issued its water year inflow forecast for Lake Powell. The most probable inflow for the full water year came in at 3.27 million acre-feet, 34% of average. The narrower April through July window, the most critical for spring refill, came in at approximately 800,000 acre-feet, about 13% of average, the lowest April through July inflow projection in the history of the record. The Bureau of Reclamation has authorized emergency operational measures in response. Reduced releases from Lake Powell down to Lake Mead, supplemental upstream releases from Flaming Gorge Reservoir in Wyoming. The federal agency operating the system is taking every move available to keep Powell above the line. The May 15th projection is what those moves look like under the current most probable inflow scenario. It is not enough. The line gets crossed by December under current conditions, and the Omega Block weather pattern locking into place this week is making the conditions worse, not better. The second deadline lands within 24 hours of the first. The 2007 interim guidelines for lower basin shortages and coordinated operations for Lakes Powell and Meade, the legal framework that has governed the lower Colorado River for the past 18 years, expires on December 31st, 2026. The framework was designed for a 19-year horizon. The expiration was built in from the day it was signed. It has been on every water lawyer's calendar for 19 years, and it expires 24 hours after Lake Powell, on the federal government's most probable trajectory, crosses minimum power pool. What does the rulebook actually do? It defines a series of elevation tiers at Lake Meade. When Meade falls below specific elevations, automatic cuts trigger in the annual Colorado River allocations to Arizona, Nevada, and at deeper tiers, California. Arizona absorbs the deepest first-tier cuts because its water rights under the original compact are junior to California's. Nevada absorbs cuts at slightly lower elevations. California is largely insulated from the early tiers because of senior water rights dating back to 1922. The cuts are not abstract. They are written into the document in specific acre-foot reductions, applied automatically by the Federal Bureau of Reclamation each August based on the August 24-month study. A Tier 2 shortage is currently in effect on the lower Colorado, declared under the existing framework. A Tier 3 shortage would likely be declared for 2027 on the basis of the May projection of Lake Meade at 1,056 feet. But the framework defining what Tier 3 means, the framework specifying the exact magnitude of those cuts, expires in 7 months. What does it mean to declare a Tier 3 shortage when the document defining Tier 3 has expired? As of late May 2026, that question is unresolved. The federal government released a replacement document, the Post-2026 Operational Guidelines, Draft Environmental Impact Statement, on January 9th of this year. The public comment period ran from January 16th through March 2nd. It received more than 18,000 submissions. The Interior Department's preferred alternative is a framework that would last approximately 20 years. The 7 basin states have not agreed on that preferred alternative. They have not agreed on most of the alternatives. They missed a November 2025 deadline to produce a consensus plan. And as of late May, with 7 months to go, no consensus exists. The 7 basin states have not been able to agree because the underlying disagreement is structural. It is not bad faith. Both sides have a defensible argument, and the difficulty is that neither side can publicly accept the framing the other side requires. The upper basin states, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, sit at the top of the river. The water flows downhill from them. In dry years, they receive less natural flow because less water is coming out of their watersheds. That loss is involuntary. Nobody negotiated it. It is what the sky did or did not do. Their position, simplified, is that they already absorb a cut every dry year by simple geography, and asking them to take additional contractual cuts on top of that is asking them to absorb the same problem twice. The lower basin states, Arizona, California, and Nevada, sit at the bottom of the river. They depend on water released from Lake Meade. Under the existing guidelines, they have legal allocations defined by elevation tiers, and their cities and agriculture have been built on those allocations. Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, the Imperial Valley, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Their position, simplified, is that asking them to absorb deeper structural cuts on top of the tier-driven reductions already triggering is asking them to dismantle infrastructure that took decades to build. Both sides are right. That is the deepest tension underneath the negotiation. There is no obvious version of a new framework that lets both sides walk away saying they were not the ones who absorbed the hardest hit. The draft environmental impact statement is the federal government's attempt to thread the needle. The 18,000 public comments are the country's response to it. The fact that the states still have not agreed, 3.5 months after the comment period closed, suggests that the federal government may end up imposing a framework by administrative action. That, in turn, would almost certainly produce litigation. Water lawyers at the major Western universities have been writing about the litigation scenarios for over a year. The most likely scenario for January 1st, 2027, is that the lower Colorado River will be operating either under a framework imposed administratively by the federal government over the objection of at least some basin states, or under no formalized framework at all, while litigation works its way through the courts. Either way, that is a legal vacuum. Water still flows. Reservoirs still release. But the connective tissue between federal allocations and state operations becomes uncertain. While the basin states negotiate, the cities have not been waiting. In early 2026, Phoenix activated its Stage 2 drought response. Under that protocol, residential outdoor irrigation is restricted to twice per week. Decorative fountain operation is eliminated except for systems that recirculate water. Washing of hard surfaces with potable water is prohibited outright. Second violations within a 12-month window carry a $150 fine. Third violations carry $250. These are city ordinances, on the books, enforced by code compliance officers. The federal government, looking at the same Lake Mead elevation data the cities have access to, has declared a Tier 2 shortage on the lower Colorado River. That declaration triggered automatic reductions in Arizona's and Nevada's annual allocations under the existing guidelines. Arizona is currently operating with less Colorado River water than it has been promised. Phoenix and Tucson, in response, have jointly created an emergency water reserve specifically to hedge against deeper cuts that everyone expects to come once the post-2026 framework is in place. On the other side of the country, Atlanta is operating under a different version of the same pressure. The Georgia Environmental Protection Division declared a statewide drought response level 1 on April 27th of this year. 96% of Georgia was in drought as of the end of March, the highest coverage Georgia has seen in several years. Atlanta's primary water supply, Lake Lanier on the Chattahoochee River, remains at functional capacity but with declining headroom. Level 1 in Georgia adds mandatory information campaign requirements for the city water utility and asks for a voluntary 5 to 10% customer conservation reduction. What all of this looks like, in practical terms, is the published drought response stages of the existing water management system being activated at once. The protocols exist. The city ordinances were written years ago. The federal shortage tier is on a routine federal worksheet. What is changing is that those protocols, designed for severe but rare events, are now all activated simultaneously across multiple regions. That is the third domino. It is already on the floor. The cities are rationing today, and the legal framework defining the elevation tiers that govern the rationing expires in 7 months. And then, in the middle of all of this, there's the place that looks like an exception. Lake Buchanan in central Texas sat at 98.9% of capacity on May 25th. Lake Travis, downstream, sat at 77.6%. Together, the Highland lakes are at levels they have not seen in 20 years. While Lake Powell is being projected to lose hydropower by December, the two largest reservoirs in central Texas are nearly full. The reason they are full is straightforward. In July 2025, severe flooding hit central Texas. Multiple training thunderstorm events delivered tens of inches of rain across the hill country in days. Before those floods, the Highland Lakes were at 51% of combined storage. Within days, they were above 90%. The lakes had been low, the flood was the refill, and in the months since, the lakes have declined gradually but remained at the 20-year highs. This week, the same omega block configuration that is heating the northern plains is fire-hosing Gulf moisture across Texas again. Yesterday, the National Weather Service issued active flash flood warnings for Pecos, Crockett, Upton, Glasscock, Midland, and Reagan counties. Between 1.5 and 5 inches of rain had fallen in those counties by mid-morning, with rainfall rates of 3 to 4 inches per hour. The Storm Prediction Center issued a slight-risk severe weather outlook for southwest and south-central Texas. The hill country, the drainage that fills the Highland Lakes, was set up for an overnight nocturnal training storm event, with rainfall rates that overwhelm drainage in minutes. So Lake Buchanan and Lake Travis are full, refilling, and likely even more full by the end of this week. The contrast with Lake Powell on its trajectory toward minimum power pool is almost cinematic. The country, in late May 2026, no longer has a single weather story. It has two stories happening simultaneously in opposite directions, both of them stress tests on a national water supply system that was designed for a unified hydrology that no longer exists. The trap inside the Texas exception is that it does not save the West. The water in Lake Buchanan does not flow to Lake Powell. There is no pipeline between Texas reservoirs and the Colorado River system. There never has been. The American water system was designed regionally, not nationally. The legal infrastructure that governs water rights stops at state lines, at watershed boundaries, at compact lines drawn 100 years ago. A wet year in Texas and a dry year in Arizona are, for the purposes of the Colorado River allocation problem, two completely independent events. The Highland Lakes being full is good news for Austin and for the agricultural users in the lower Colorado River Authority service area. It is not good news for Phoenix. The country no longer has a unified water supply situation. It is fragmented into regional water economies that do not add up to a coherent national picture. The water's there. The water cannot get to the places that need it. The Highland Lakes, at 99% of capacity, sitting in a country whose other major reservoirs are projected to lose their hydropower threshold by December, is not a contradiction. It is the perfect illustration of the problem. The atmospheric pattern producing both the Texas refill and the Lake Powell snowmelt acceleration is the same pattern. The way it produces two opposite outcomes from a single configuration tells you something important about why the American water supply problem is now genuinely uncoordinated. The current Omega Block has its central ridge over the central and north-central United States. Under that ridge, air sinks. Sinking air compresses and warms. The ground beneath warms with it. Cloud cover is suppressed. Solar radiation hits unobstructed. In the Dakotas, the forecast for Tuesday and Wednesday was 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 15 to 20 degrees above the normal late May reading, with humidity collapsing into the teens. The heat extends west into Montana and Wyoming, into the high country of the Rockies, exactly the region where the remaining snowpack of the Colorado River Basin sits on the peaks. That heat is actively accelerating the loss of whatever snowpack remains. The runoff that the Bureau of Reclamation's May 5th forecast assumed would arrive on a certain schedule is arriving earlier and faster than the schedule allowed for. The eastern lobe of the Omega Block, on the other hand, is fueling the Gulf-fed storm track over Texas. Air rises under troughs, rising air cools. Moisture condenses, storms form. The same pattern that is melting Mountain West snow is refilling Texas reservoirs. One configuration, two opposite outcomes. This is not a coincidence of geography. It is the structural shape of the problem. The American water system was designed in an era when regional hydrology was relatively stable, when basin compacts governed locally, and when the federal government coordinated nationally only when truly extreme events crossed regional lines. The Omega Block this week is a perfect demonstration of why that assumption no longer holds. A single atmospheric pattern is producing extreme outcomes in opposite directions in different regions in the same week, and the legal and infrastructural seams between those regions mean that the country cannot redirect the water. Underneath the surface water story, two slower trends are running in parallel. They do not change week to week. They change decade to decade, and both of them have arrived at structurally critical points. In the same year, the surface water deadlines are converging. The Ogallala Aquifer underlies approximately 225,000 square miles beneath 6 states. The High Plains Underground Water Conservation District reported an average aquifer level change for the 2026 measurement cycle of negative 0.57 feet, half a foot of decline in a year. The cumulative decline in the Texas Panhandle since the start of large-scale irrigation is approximately 44 feet. A 2025 University of Texas projection indicated that up to 70% of the Texas Panhandle could become unusable for irrigated agriculture within 20 years if current pumping rates continue. The aquifer's water is fossil water laid down during the wetter Pleistocene climate, with essentially zero modern recharge on any human timescale. The depletion is permanent, and in drought years, irrigators lean harder on it because surface water has failed. The parallel trend is the data center buildout. United States data centers directly consumed approximately 66 billion liters of water in 2023. Federal projections anticipate an additional 200 to 300 billion gallons of annual U.S. data center water consumption by 2030. Roughly two-thirds of the data centers built in the United States since 2022 have been sited in regions the federal government classifies as water-stressed, including Arizona. The Loudoun County, Virginia data center cluster saw direct potable water use grow more than 250% between 2019 and 2023, reaching approximately 10% of all county water consumption. The artificial intelligence build-out has accelerated this demand growth into exactly the regions where Colorado River allocations are being cut. The El Niño forming in the equatorial Pacific is the most plausible mechanism for delivering relief to the Southwest. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center puts the probability of El Niño onset by July at between 82 and 98%, depending on the agency forecast. The probability of persistence into the 2026 to 2027 winter is approximately 96%. The signal is strong. The trap is the timing. El Niño's wet influence on the American Southwest peaks in late autumn and winter, typically November through March. The deadline for Lake Powell to cross minimum power pool is December. The legal framework expires on December 31st. The El Niño rescue, even at full strength, arrives after both deadlines have passed. Between now and December, watch 4 things. The monthly Bureau of Reclamation. 24-month studies, which will tell you whether the projected December elevation moves up or down as the spring melt and summer demand data come in. The post-2026 negotiations among the 7 basin states, which will tell you whether a consensus framework is reached or whether the federal government imposes one. The municipal drought response stages in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and the Atlanta metropolitan area, which will tell you whether the cities tighten further. And the El Niño development tracking from NOAA, which will tell you whether the rescue mechanism is arriving early, on schedule, or late. The water that built the American West is running out. The rule book that managed that water is running out with it, and the 7 months between now and December are when the country either catches the dominoes or watches them fall.